Welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance for a global audience. How are you, Eduardo?
I'm doing very well, Damian. How about you?
Good. I'm here in the cold of Mexico City.
I think it's colder there than here.
I think it probably is. It gets cold in San Francisco in the summer, right? That's the famous
because of the fall.
Mark Twain quote, which everyone uses. So this week, we have two great interviews, one with Zélika García. Zélika is the founder and the head of ZONAMACO, the art fair that's beginning next week in Mexico City. That's last year attracted 80,000 visitors. This year's going to have 220 galleries, responsible for the second biggest week of tourism in Mexico City after Formula One in November. So great interview with Zélika. Encourage you to stay on and listen to it. And we have an interview with Juan Saldívar. Juan is a marketing and consumer brands consultant. He's based in LA, but he's Mexican. And he's going to talk a little bit about how Mexican companies are and should be building consumer brands in the US and what the opportunities there. So, Eduardo, I mean, this week we had this big meeting yet again in Palacio Nacional in the National Palace with the president. This time she met with all the top bankers, and the message was, please finance Plan México, her plan to bring investment up in Mexico, replace imports from other countries, especially from Asia. According to this one story I read, sadly wasn't invited in my case, but the bank said that by the end of 2030, they're going to raise credit to GDP to 50% from 35%. And a lot of this money is going to apparently go to financing infrastructure and energy projects, which are key to Plan Mexico. And there was also talk about digitalizing the economy through digital payments and reducing informality, which is a big problem for tax collection, big problem for productivity in Mexico, though not much, as far as I could tell, not much details on how they would go about that. I mean, I think from my side, the banks make huge amounts of money. BBVA makes $6 billion a year in Mexico. It's one of the most profitable banks in the world. The sort of threat is if you don't lend more and promote Plan Mexico, we're going to do stuff to hurt you. And one of the things they've already announced that we talked about at some length last year was a review of the fees that banks get to charge on credit cards and debit cards, and maybe bringing those down, which would be very problematic for the profitability of some of them at least. So those are kind of, we want you to play games, and if you do, then maybe, we'll be less strict on you. What was your read of this event, Eduardo?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got the invitation, Damian, but since I'm in San Francisco, I couldn't go. My read is, I don't know how honest these meetings are. There were a lot of people on it. I don't know how much you can achieve with so many people on the table talking about it. But I hope the bankers also said, yes, we can lend more, but if there is no demand for lending, what can we do about it? I don't know if they did that, but that's the problem that I think Mexico faces, in the sense that it hasn't done all the homework that it needs to do to make it a more attractive place to invest and make it a more palatable territory for companies to set up shop. I mean, we are next to the biggest market in the world. We have a free trade agreement. We haven't been as hurt as much as other areas because of the Trump protectionist stand. And yet we have issues that are internally produced that have not generated that interest. Those are potentially the judicial changes, be it the elections for judges, the desamparo, the amparo law. And so I don't know how much bankers told the president, don't punish us, changes these things, and we will be very happy to lend to anyone that comes into the country. I think there are elements there that are contradictions on its own by what the government wants, but what it's doing at the same time. And obviously the bankers could lend more. We have a tremendous amount of money in the Afore system that could also be put into infrastructure projects and things like that. It's just that they need to also shape up and understand how the markets work, my read.
Yeah, I mean, I think the context of this is this disappointing GDP. Bank of America put out a report that I got to see, noting that Mexico's per capita growth over the last 5 years is just 1.5%, 9% in the US, 11% in Korea, more than 20% in China and Vietnam. And even compared to Latin America over the last 20 years, Mexico's per capita GDP growth has been under 10%, whereas you have a 30% for the rest of the region. And obviously last year, economy grew at 0.5% or so, and this year probably 1.5%. Most optimistic scenario out there is 2%, so probably going to be short or in line with population growth yet again. So I think the president is sort of getting the message, bringing people in. So you probably saw the week before that or 2 weeks before that, they had a meeting with 8 economists, including Gerardo Esquivel, the former deputy governor of the central bank, former deputy finance minister, reasonably well aligned with the government, long-time friends of the president and other people in her circle. It was interesting. Gerardo wrote a column in Milenio saying it was this tremendous meeting, great meeting. They discussed, for 2 hours, apparently, the obstacles to Mexico growth, which was investment, certainty, institutions, such as the judiciary, financing constraints, and energy. So all the issues that we've talked about and everyone talks about. But if you look at the economists, and I think this says as much about my bias as Sheinbaum's bias, they were mostly people that I'd never heard of, which again, I hasten to add is reflects poorly on me. But they're basically academic economists from the UNAM or from the CDA, and not people who are, especially well known in the private sector. And as I said, I think they probably should be well known, but they're not the sort of the normal economists that you see. And so you had like Carlos Serrano wasn't there, the BBVA economist. BBVA is 1/3 of the banking system in Mexico, 1/3, probably more than 1/3 of credit. Gabriel Casillas, Barclays, very prominent economist, wasn't there. Mesmaca, the former deputy finance minister and one of the top professor at the DAM. Gabriela Silla from Banco Base is very sort of talked about. Valeria Moy from the IMCO. Miriam Acuña, who's been on this podcast, from GBM. So there was sort of very much a lack of the market economist, and certainly wouldn't suggest they should all be market economists, but it'd be quite useful to have had a few people to complement the academics, to talk about how they see the constraints on growth.
I couldn't agree more with you, Damien. I think that's a lack of openness on the part of the administration to hear things that probably they don't want to listen or hear from people that have a different point of view of what they're doing. And that is the problem. Sheinbaum is not an economist. I'm happy that she's hearing others, and Gerardo is well regarded and has a very good market-oriented probably notions, as well as the finance minister. But how much is she willing really to bend her own preconceived ideology about how markets work or where the state should be versus the markets? It's not that we need to be fully the savage capitalism set up in Mexico. I wish that sometimes that there was. We have dualistic, monopolistic practices all over. But if she could understand how markets work, would do wonders for her, and would do wonders for her social aims, which are very valuable. And I think we would all agree that the more people that leave poverty, the greater the country will be. But to do that, you need to grow. And to grow, you need to attract people that make the economies grow. And she simply doesn't do it or doesn't want to do it. And it's a bit of a shame. I think Mexico is right now, with all the changes that are going geopolitical, Mexico is in the right place at the right time. If she would only open up a little bit, you don't need to sell Pemex, you don't need to sell the CFE as they claim that the other administrations were doing, which is not true. But you need to private investors come in and do their things, and you can regulate them. It infuriates me in a certain way. Anyway.
Yeah, well, we probably don't want to be whinging about government policy, because at the same time, we're whinging too much. There's lots of good things. happening in the private sector and bad things in the private sector, needless to say, but some good things that are helping moving the country along. One of the things that struck my attention was Revolut, Mexico, which has just got its bank license. I think it's gone through at least 3 launches in Mexico since I've been on this podcast. Anyway, did yet another launch this week, and they're going to be announced. They are offering 15% on your deposits up to 25,000 pesos, and then it goes down to 7% up to 1 million pesos, and then 5% above that. So it's an attractive offering, especially the 15% heading, even if it's capped at a 25,000 amount. I think New right now is offering 13% on roughly the same amount capped on a turbo account. I'm a new account holder. Then roughly 7% thereafter. And GBM also, I think, is offering Mercado Pago through GBM is offering also 13%. So you're seeing the deposit wars, which calmed down a bit last year. You're seeing another player coming in. Now the issue here is that people in Mexico, as we've talked about a lot, need and want cash, because 80% or so of transactions in cash, and the fintechs almost by definition don't offer you commission-free cash. So they have a big disadvantage versus the incumbent banks in the environment of Mexico. It's a bit of a catch-22. If everyone's using cash, then you need cash, and then you don't put all your money in a fintech. And secondly, I think there's even if it's unwarranted, there's still a sort of trust issue in that people are happy to have small amounts of money with fintechs, like New or Revolut now, but they don't want to have like significant savings. And Banorte, which reported fourth quarter results and had a conference call, and this was highlighted in white paper today, which is Thursday, this morning, the average balance in a fintech account is much, much lower than in a branch account. So people, it might be trust, it might be lack of access to cash. And also, because you have digital onboarding and under the Mexican rules, it's quite difficult to put a lot of money into a fintech account because there are caps on what you can deposit when there's no physical presence. So all in all, great news. Revolut, it's not just about deposits. Obviously, Revolut, which I've used a lot in the UK in the past, is, and many of my friends and family use it. They've got commission-free international transfers. You can split expenses. You can open up kids' accounts. You can have what I find really useful. You can have multi-currency accounts. So you've got a peso account and a British pound account, a dollar account, and pay. If you're in Britain, instead of paying with your Mexican card and getting ripped off on the exchange rate, you can pay directly with the peso account that you have within your overall account. So there's lots of functionality that Revolut has that even New doesn't have to the same extent right now. So we'll see how it goes. It's going to be difficult because that space has already been occupied to some extent by New and Klar and Story and Plata and Mercado Pago, of course. But eventually, as we've talked about before, it's going to put pressure on the incumbent banks to offer more attractive yields. And as they do that, the profitability will come down unless they lend more, because they make money from lending, obviously. So I think by reducing the subsidy on deposits, if you want to call it that, you encourage more lending, which would be great. And we've talked about that in the past. And obviously that's what Sheinbaum wanted in her meeting with the bankers.
Yeah, I think this seemed like a much more serious launch, Damian, than the other ones that they had before. They looked serious. They had a press conference. They had people there, and yeah, the 15% seems attractive. It's not sustainable for the long run, no? Don't you think? In the sense that how are you financing those high rates if you're not lending that much or anything like that? But it's appealing to start with. Others have done it and they've been successful. So we'll have to wait and see how it evolves. But I think the functionality of Revolut that you just mentioned seems very, very attractive. No fees charged in international transactions and other stuff that gotta put on the plate for those that open an account will be an interesting proposition to watch and see how it goes into the market that it's already occupied by others. Maybe there's, not maybe, I'm sure there is room for everybody. The cake is big enough.
Yeah, Banorte, in its conference call, I thought, touched on an important issue. They said, look, these attractive deposit rates mean, especially in the case of new, they have more deposits than loans, which is costly when you're paying over CETES for your deposits. So there's a misbalance, they have too much liquidity. And secondly, because this is expensive, having so many high-yielding deposits, they're lending at very, very high rates to still be able to make money. And that is generating high or contributing to high delinquency ratios, because basically the only clients who are going to pay these 100% yields on the credit card are clients who don't get credit elsewhere. So they're sort of bad clients almost by definition. So he was sort of saying that they're sort of caught trapped by this strategy of paying a lot for deposits, charging a lot for credit, getting high delinquency rates, and I guess implicitly was raising questions of how sustainable all of this was. Meanwhile, Banorte reported really good numbers. I think the stock was up 5% or nearly 5% when they reported on Wednesday. They're kind of textbook sort of transition to a higher, which is what everyone wants, to higher loan growth, good yields on their loans. And meanwhile, with interest rates coming down, their funding costs are also coming down, so that they're not seeing pressure from the fintechs leading them to raise the yields on the deposits. So they're looking at GDP growth a bit better this year, 1.25, 1.4 to 1.8. The World Cup spending, construction, USMC outlook improving. Their own loan growth, I think, is 8. Their guidance for 2026 is 8 to 11%. So in other words, almost 6 times GDP growth. So that's pretty good. And they're you're looking at pretty strong in the consumer side, 10 to 14%, credit cards 14 to 18, autos 15 to 20% loan growth. So overall, pretty optimistic outlook for this year, and they didn't seem too worried about the interchange issue, which affects Banorte less than some of the other banks anyway. But they said that they expected a reasonable kind of compromise to be reached, but it was a bigger deal for the smaller banks and the fintechs than it was for the more diversified banks that have lots of revenues from other streams.
Yeah, I mean, and if you allow me, Damian, on that positive note about the results that Banorte had, we also had the overall numbers for our export or external sector coming out in the last few days. And despite Trump and all the tariffs that we have faced, exports in Mexico behave very well. That's a little bit of what I was talking about, that we have a lot to gain from our geographical location and our free trades. Total exports rose 7.6% last year, while imports grew also 4.4%. Obviously, within those numbers, there were sectors that were hurt. The auto sector exported less, 4.2%, while obviously oil exports fell 26.4%. But when you look at manufacturing, they rose 9.8%. So there you go. Mexico is producing more and selling more abroad. Maybe some of the loans that Banorte has given and are profitable are for those guys that are still doing well when they sell their goods and services abroad. Mining obviously was a very growth sector in the export arena, with 26.9% of mining exports growing last year. So I think that's a little bit of the status of where we are, where with an external sector that is still producing growth, still doing well, despite all the geopolitical elements that seem to be against it. And that's a beacon of hope for the future, I suspect. And if we renegotiate a free trade agreement with America, that'll be even better. Now, we have the peso reaching today it's at 17.3. I think yesterday was even stronger. that's an issue, and we will have to wait and see how it might impact the external sector of Mexico, both on the import side and the export side. It seems to be a little bit not necessarily in sync with the movements of the currency, but in the long term or in the middle term, it might have an impact as to how much you can sell abroad or how many tourists come to Mexico. The World Cup, people have the impression of Mexico being cheap. They might be surprised if the peso keeps at this rate. And so that's an element to watch in the next few months.
That's right. I read a story today in Reforma about how the strong peso is affecting the agricultural sector, which exports to the US a lot. Now, it's really, I guess it's an issue above all for companies that are competing with the US for sales in the US, because the euro has also strengthened a lot against the dollar and the yen and South American currency. So it's a fairly generalized phenomenon. So Mexico, vis-a-vis other exporters to the US, doesn't look quite as bad, the appreciation, although the peso has appreciated more than on most other currencies. But there are lots of areas like agriculture where Mexico competes with Florida or competes with California, where this currency is an issue. But at the same time, the trade numbers are very good, as you just said. The trade balance is roughly in equilibrium. Current account deficit is tiny. And so there's no real fundamental reason why the peso should appreciate. And so Trump has thrown everything at Mexico since he took over. And so even if he throws more stuff at Mexico, my suspicion is that, the currency markets would probably take it in their stride. Now, you've got the central bank cutting rates, so the carry trade, which was very favorable to Mexico. Is gonna be less favorable going forward. So maybe if in response to this strong peso, the central bank cuts rates while the Fed is sort of on hold and the interest rate differential comes down, maybe some of this appreciation will go away, or at least will stop appreciating. But I went to a fancy restaurant, but not like not sort of Pujol or Quintanil or Maximo or Rosetta. I went to a fancy restaurant, Gamba, in Mexico City. Good food, recommend it. But translated into dollars, you're paying $80 for a main course, $100 for a main course. I mean, it's a totally different economy to the rest of Mexico. I fully understand that, but the tourists that are eating in these restaurants, must think that Mexico's more expensive than their hometown, unless they live in sort of New York City or Geneva or Zurich.
No, without a doubt. And now, what you said about the rate differential, I think one element that we need to talk, or we need to look at it, is the 30-year bond. The spread on that one it's not come as it hasn't shrank as much, and that's why I think that the long-term curve is helping the peso probably as well, in the sense that you get much higher yield by buying long-term Mexican bonds versus U.S. bonds, long-term bonds. So it's tricky. Maybe the central bank is accumulating a lot of reserves. I don't know if this is it needs any more, but they could also enter the market and buy a few more dollars to try to avoid the peso getting even stronger than it is already. We'll have to wait and see. But I think the authorities should be carefully analyzing what to do, because this strong peso is not necessarily the best of all worlds for Mexico's export sector, for its tourism sector and many other sectors, and that's the only one that is growing. So you at least have to take care of the side of the economy that is working well. So
to finalize, Grupo México, the Copa Transportation Infrastructure conglomerate, also reported spectacular results, because 70% of its earnings come from copper, which obviously has been on a tear for the last year. So they doubled their net profit. EBITDA was up 20% from 2024, and And that's even with sort of weakness in the energy side because of Pemex problems. And as a result of that, I was sort of looking, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but now Grupo México is by far the largest company by market cap in the Mexican stock market. Its market cap is $91 billion, and it's almost 50% larger than the second largest company, which is American Mobile, which is $65 billion. So we have a market that never before, until this rally in copper, has had its largest company. As a commodities company, Mexico traditionally, when I used to be a stock analyst years ago, was sort of dominated by telcos and consumer and banks, but now it's Grupo México by a big margin. So interestingly, for me at least, Grupo México worth 91 billion. A decade ago, Grupo México was worth 15 billion.
Wow.
Peñoles is now worth $28 billion. The largest silver company in the world by production. They control and own the majority in Fresnillo, which is pure silver. Peñoles has some other businesses aside. And 10 years ago, Fresnillo was worth $3.8 billion. So it's up, 7x, 8x over that 10-year period. But so you see AMX, 10 years ago was worth 46, now worth 65. Walmex was worth 44, now worth 58. FEMSA was worth 32, now worth 35, hasn't really moved. Banorte's had a good run. It's gone from 14 to 32. But you've seen this, the other one that has been impressive is Cemex, which was a decade ago worth $9.5 billion, is now worth 20. It was worth 6.7 billion, and now it's worth 19 billion. So it's had a very impressive run, basically coming out of it sort of near bankruptcy a decade ago, because it used to be 20, 30 years ago worth more than today's price. So we've seen a stock market because of this rally in commodity prices that's become much more driven by commodity, and we have the biggest company by a huge margin, being mainly a copper company, which is quite a turn up for the books compared to how the Mexican stock market used to be. Now they have too much cash. Grupo México, as we know, they were trying to buy at one point Banamex. They didn't get it. They have, I think, about $8 billion dollars of cash on their balance sheet. Almost no debt. So they're in their conference call they talked about, as you may have seen, that they said the capex for 2026 is going to be forecast at 2.8 billion from 2 billion last year. So big, almost 50% increase in capex. And then they talked about a $27 billion program for capex going through to 2030, including 10 billion in Mexico. But they said it was pending permits. And we talked about that last week on the mining sector.
Right.
But they did say, that they were encouraged by, the narrative from the government that they were going to be more open to mining investment. And they're sitting there, and they talked about all these projects that had been put on pause under AMLO, under the previous president, that they're now willing to kickstart again. So, there's no company that I'm aware of that has more cash on hand today to invest in Mexico than Grupo México. It's the largest company in the country. That is now, must be the second richest man in the country after Carlos Slim. He didn't get Banamex, and Mexico geologically is very, very fortunate in terms of silver and copper and gold reserves and other stuff like that. So let's see if that actually happens. But if you're talking about investment being the critical bottleneck to growth, Grupo México is sitting there waiting to invest.
Yeah, I wondered, Damian, I think Grupo Mexico's rise, as you've just described, has a lot to do, I think they're piggybacking on the technology sectors and AI and all the needs from these companies for raw materials like copper. And so I think it's an indirect play of the technology boom that is taking place in all markets. Among other things, and how many times have we heard about rare earths as being a crucial component of different products, parts and elements of cars, computers, servers, digital centers. So again, everything is there. It's just a matter of taking the right decision in policy to let it prosper. And obviously, there are environmental concerns. Nobody is not talking about and not looking after those, but I'm sure there would be ways of making things that everyone benefits, working things that everyone benefits from.
That's right. And I think we're going to see at least incrementally positive news with both the government and the private sector, keen to invest and put the AMLO years behind the country from an investment perspective. Obviously, lots of good things happened from a poverty reduction perspective and other areas. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the program, the authorities are also flush with cash. So I think we're in an interesting position. And if USMA goes Mexico's way in one form or another, you could see investment picking up. Alta Gracia in the Davos speech talked about investment going from 24 to 25% of GDP this year, and then to 28. People are skeptical, but that's the goal. Shall we move, Eduardo, to the interviews with Juan and Zélika?
Please, let's do so.
So it's a real pleasure to have with us today Zélika García. Zélika is the founder and the head of ZONAMACO, Mexico and Latin America's most important art fair. ZONAMACO, as many of our listeners will know, is kicking off next week, and Mexico will be receiving art lovers from the country and from elsewhere to buy art in the fair or just to look at art in the fair. Zélika, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Damian. Thank you, Eduardo. Next week, we kick off ZONAMACO's 22nd edition at Centro City Banamex in Mexico City, as you know. And we have more than 220 galleries participating from around 30 different countries. We have 4 sections in the fair. One of them is the art section. The other is Salón del Anticuario, design, and photography.
Zélika, why do you think ZONAMACO has been such a success? What have you done to have turned it into this kind of cultural icon of Mexico City? Wherever I go in the world, people say, oh, ZONAMACO, Mexico City, almost in the same breath.
Well, when the fair started, Mexico City had many galleries, but not as many as we have today, and a few collectors. But for the past 22 years, the cultural scene has been growing, and we have more and more international groups, museum groups and collectors that come for this week, as well as Mexican public from all over Mexico, not only from Mexico City. The number of galleries has grown substantially in the city and in the country, as well as the participation. That's why we've grown every year a little bit more, although we don't want to make the fair so big. Sometimes we have to, because we have so many local galleries that are participating and that are opening in the city. We also have more and more artists in the city and more corporate and private collections. We run a whole program during the ZONAMACO Art Week, including openings in local galleries, in museums, in foundations and institutions. This year, we have some special programs in Jumex Museum, Tamayo, Museo de Arte Moderno, and the Cuadra Barragán. So, among many, many others, of course. And also a celebration for the art fair. We have many parties going on around that week and other art fairs that are parallel to ZONAMACO, as well as exhibitions, and the city becomes a celebration for art and culture. And now music as well.
And why do you think it has taken off like this? You must have reflected, now that it's been 22 years, on what the causes of the success are.
Well, first of all, because we have great art, great artists, and a great number of museums. I think we are the city with most museums in the world. And we have a very rich cultural program, as well as artists and galleries, of course. And also the location of Mexico City and the warmth of the people. We are great hosts, and the location is very important. We have a center location where it's easy to access from all over the world. And also, I think we have great weather now, especially since everywhere it's so cold. So I guess it's a place where people can escape, have fun, have tequila. It's a more relaxed type of fair, even though we have very important galleries, blue chip galleries, as well as mid-career and emerging galleries. We also offer a different kind of ambience that makes people be friends and colleagues and not just be visiting in a very strict professional way. I think in Mexico, people are more relaxed, and probably when you are more relaxed, you make better business with the people you meet.
Hi, Zélika. In that sense, do you think also and Mexico's gastronomy, Mexico has become synonym with coolness for some, the digital nomads, the pandemic was probably harsh for everybody, but has that also contributed to the success?
Yes, I think the pandemic made a lot of people move to Mexico, including many artists. And we also have great production. Production, I mean, for producing artworks like ceramics or handcrafts, where it is easy to access for artists to make different things that maybe they cannot do in other places in the world because of there's no people to do it, and it's also sometimes very expensive. And Mexico has a lot of studios offering those types of production. So yes, the pandemic helped and because of the production, the artists stayed to live in Mexico and Guadalajara and Monterrey and all over. Also, the gastronomy besides we have great food, we have amazing chefs that have been more worldwide recognized recently in the past few years. Actually, we have a surprise with a very special chef, Elena Reigadas, at the opening of the fair. It's sort of like a performance, sort of like an installation. You have to see it. We've never done it. It's just an idea we had, Elena and I, and it's happening. But we collaborate with many chefs around the city, and people enjoy, as you say, the gastronomy, the art, the culture. Sometimes the music. We have a lot of events with music around. We have an opening party with Le Baron, these DJs from Paris that are celebrating their 22nd anniversary. And then we're also bringing Abracadabra with Blondish on Saturday for artsy nights. So I guess people that visit ZONAMACO won't get bored, and probably they won't finish looking at all the exhibitions and going all the places that are offered during the ZONAMACO Art Week.
So, like in that sense, I don't know. We're a business podcast, and I don't know if you have a figure on how much transaction Mako generates for the art world.
I know you're in business, and I don't talk about numbers because we don't sell the art. But for the city, it's the second week in the city after Formula One with more tourism and
like trickling down economics to the city, the businesses, everything else.
The restaurants, the hotels, all the services in the city. It's the second busiest week and best week for Mexico City for tourism and for all this economic exchange that happens during ZONAMACO Art Week. Also, within the fair, of course, there is large transactions with art and design and antiques and photography. We don't do the transactions directly. We sell square meters, but the galleries would not come back, and we wouldn't have more and more galleries every year if they didn't do a business. The reason galleries participate in art fairs is to make business. They're not there just to show their art. They want to sell it and make transactions. So part of the success of ZONAMACO is also all the business that the galleries that come here make. We have very big galleries that participate every year. And of course, we have new galleries, emerging galleries in the young artist section every year as well. And if it weren't for the sales, they wouldn't be participating.
Correct. And I assume also Mexican artists are also getting more recognition abroad. Like Damian said, I also hear when I travel that there is a spirit, a cultural spirit in Mexico that is burgeoning up, that it's quite interesting that there are a lot of artists living here, making plans here, painting, sculpture, like you said, pottery, all these other things. Is that part of what MACO has contributed to?
It helps a lot, for example, when galleries from abroad are in ZONAMACO and Mexican curators or Mexican institutions get to know these artists and discover their artworks. Sometimes they invite them to exhibit in Mexican museums. And the same happens for Mexican artists to go abroad and exhibit in museums or institutions outside of Mexico, as well as galleries outside of Mexico. And all of this makes the artist stronger. Especially the Mexican artists have gained a lot of worldwide projection because of ZONAMACO. Then they receive representation from a gallery in Spain or in Berlin or in London or in New York. And this makes Latin American art more and more important around the world. And I guess also for us Mexicans to receive these international artists throughout the year, not only during ZONAMACO in the city, makes our culture grow, our collectors expand their views and their collections, and the Mexican artists to grow with the international influence.
Zélika, I imagine in those 22 years, it hasn't always been plain sailing. It hasn't always been one success after another. Tell us about some of the difficult moments you've had running ZONAMACO and how you dealt with those moments.
Well, there's been a lot, not only a few. In the beginning, I think the most difficult part was to get the galleries to come to Mexico and to participate and to pay for a booth. They didn't believe in the Mexican collectors, I guess because they didn't really know them. And the first year we had only 22 galleries. That number grew when those galleries were by word of mouth telling everybody how great Mexico was and how high level of collectors existed in the country. So in the beginning, that was the most complicated thing. After we got very different, we ran into different problems, including from I touched wood from an earthquake to the H1N1 to volcanoes. I don't remember where, and people were trapped here because the flights were canceled. So we've been through many different issues during the fairs. But in the end, I think keeping a clear head and trying to do the best for everyone and figuring it out together. For example, in COVID, we didn't have an actual art fair, but we had a ZONAMACO Art Week all around the city in 5 circuits with the galleries. And this initiative happened not because me or one person in the team had the idea, but because we had constant meetings with all of our clients from Mexico trying to figure out a way to make something happen for them to do sales, because during COVID nobody was selling. And it's just sort of thinking outside the box sometimes. You need to figure out with what you have in front and try and do the best for everyone, especially for the galleries that are our main clients. We have a lot of sponsors, of course, that are also clients, but the most important is the galleries. No galleries, no fair.
You mentioned, Zélika, that you, as we know, you don't sell the art, you sell the square meters to the galleries and plus sponsorship. That said, you probably have a good feel for the fair. and what's working and what's not working. Are the international collectors more important overall to the fair, that the ones that come here, than the domestic collectors? How does it split from a domestic international perspective?
It is now equal. In the beginning, there were more Mexican collectors than international. Each year, the international number of collector grows, but they are equally important because the international collectors come to discover basically Mexican and Latin American artists. The rest of the artists that are international artists, they can see probably in other art fairs. So their most interest is to see Latin American and Mexican art. But the Mexicans, the other way around, the Mexicans want to see the international art and want to buy the international art because they have the Mexican art all year in their country, in their city. So I think it's sort of a balanced number, and the gallery number is also balanced. I'm almost sure we have 40% Mexican galleries and 60% international. So the balance between galleries and collector exchange is also equal, almost equal.
Zélika, we've seen some consolidation in global art fairs, right? I think Frieze has been buying, Basel has got bigger. You're, so far at least, independent and Mexican. Have you ever thought about joining up with one of the global art fairs?
I've had a lot of questions about this, and more about if we're doing ZONAMACO in another country. For me personally, as the founder of the fair, I love my country. I want to keep growing ZONAMACO in my country, and I think there is enough art fairs in the world. I'm not interested in doing an art fair in Miami or in Brazil. They already have art fairs. I would love to keep on expanding ZONAMACO in Mexico, and not necessarily with other fairs. Last year, we did an initiative called ZONAMACO Lab. It was a project that lasted 5 weeks in a house in Mexico City, where we created an exhibition with experiences for kids and for families. We're doing that again next year. We've been doing Circuito ZONAMACO throughout the year, where one Saturday per month, we promote one of the circuits with the galleries and special exhibitions and curators giving talks and artists greeting people and meeting people. So my aim would be more to grow in Mexico country with different initiatives than to do more art fairs or any type of fairs. Growing ZONAMACO Lab, of course, we did it this year in Mexico City. Next year, we're doing Mexico City. Maybe we do Monterrey and Guadalajara as well. We're also doing parallel side from ZONAMACO, Art Baja California, a festival in San José del Cabo, La Paz, and Todos Santos. This will be the 4th year of the festival, but the first year that we do a fair in San José del Cabo. It's a very small fair called Plataforma ABC in a hotel. We have 30 galleries participating in March 18th to 22nd. And starting a fair there makes sense. It's Plataforma, it's a different format, it's a different fair. But it makes sense because that part of Mexico is so distant from the rest of the country. And by doing the festival for 3 years, we saw that there is space to do more ZONAMACOs. Is not in our plans as of now.
Zélika, you mentioned that obviously you've grown tremendously over the past 22 years, from 20 galleries to 220 galleries. What can you tell us about the number of visitors to the ZONAMACO? Can you give us a sense of
I still remember the number of visitors in our first edition was 3,000 visitors. Last year, we had almost 80,000 visitors. And what is interesting about this is we don't have 80,000 buyers. That would be amazing. But I am very happy that we have all these visitors learning about art and not only buyers, but also this as an experience for the local Mexicans or visitors from around Mexico that come and appreciate art, because they could never see this art unless they travel to 30 different countries and 220 galleries. So to have it all in 5 days in the same space is worth it, and it's enriching for the kids, for the families, for all different types of visitors, even if they are not art collectors. We also have, I forgot to mention, we have a book section that is very successful, and we have over 50 booth spaces for books. And this is also another section of the fair that has a lot of success.
Zélika, I'm going to be a little bit on the reverse of Damian. What have been the big success elements that you've seen? I mean, you've already mentioned the size, all the innovations that you have brought to the fair. But can you tell us, has there an artist that started with ZONAMACO and became a big name and has increased the price?
There is many artists that started in ZONAMACO that are now very successful and well known around the world. There is galleries that have participated for 22 years. I think one of the turning points for international exposure, and I have I never mention particular artists or galleries because it becomes very complicated. I have a lot of artists and galleries in the fair. But there was one year, I think it was 2008 or 9, I'm not really sure, where all these fairs that started at the same time as us were becoming very international, and we were a little bit stuck with Mexico and had few international guests. And one day I spoke, well, not one day, many days, I spoke to Gabriel Orozco and to Kurimansuto Gallery, and I said, how do we make this an international success, not only for Mexican, but we want international visitors, more international press, more international everything. And what we planned together was to have Gabriel Orozco's solo show exhibition in Kurimansuto at the same time during ZONAMACO. And that helped us get many museum groups and curators and international experts that had never been to Mexico. And that was a team effort between the gallery, the artist, and us. And that was a turning point for the international crowd. Of course, I also worked a lot at that time. After that, like 2 years after that, Juan Gaitán was the director of Tamayo, and he made an international museum board. And this international museum board helped us do the Tamayo Gala for the first time. And each international member of the board brought a table with his international friends. So we had 180 international guests of the Tamayo International Board. And this also helped create awareness. And I guess from that point on, it started to work organically.
Well, Zélika, it's very impressive what you have accomplished as the founder of ZONAMACO. Congratulations, really admirable. I just kept on listening to what you have accomplished in the creation of different types of formulas to bring in different artists, different ways to show art. Congratulations, fantastic. And thank you for sharing some of your time, which I'm sure it's quite demanded by right now before the fair opens up.
Thank you, and looking forward to see you next week.
Thank you.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have with us today Juan Saldívar. How are you, Juan?
Great. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, Damian, for having me.
Thank you, Juan, for being joining us.
Juan's been on our program before. He's the CEO of SWS Consulting, 35 years of experience in marketing, media, VC, and e-commerce. Juan basically helps brands grow in Mexico and the US. He focuses a lot on CPG companies, agencies, media firms looking to expand through marketing, investments, M&A, hands-on management. He's worked at Televisa, he worked at Bertelsmann, he worked at Submarino, the e-commerce shop from Brazil, Rise Capital, and senior executive until recently of Entravision, the radio network focused on the Hispanic audience in the US, but with operations around the world. So, Juan, I saw an article you wrote in LinkedIn, which is what led to this interview, highlighting the big opportunities for Mexican companies in the US market and how, in some cases at least, those opportunities are not being taken advantage of. Can you just go into a little bit detail with respect to your argument in your piece?
Of course, Damien. And again, thank you both for inviting me to talk about this topic, which I'm very passionate about, which is inspired after, of course, decades of working around media and marketing and trying to find out ways to grow businesses. And I have been for years surprised on how much business and how many opportunities there are around the U.S. market that are not exploited enough by Mexican companies. The U.S. it's an enormous market, as you know, and it's a neighbor country to us. And even though, yes, the North has been an enormous market within our trade agreements in the past 3 decades, I believe that the potential is still massive. I think most of the commerce with the U.S. is concentrated in a very short list of hands, and I'm still very surprised that there's not a lot of academic and institutional support to export more into the U.S. market. So that is what inspired me to write this article that specifically taps into the discussion around consumer packaged goods in the U.S. space.
And what are your sort of generic kind of recommendations to take advantage of the U.S. market? What should Mexican companies in the consumer sector should they be doing more of?
Well, the first thing that I think is fundamental is to openly recognize that the U.S. To be specific, is a market that is literally massive and has extraordinary potential for brands. Compared to Mexico, the U.S. is multiple fold in terms of GDP. So it's a $28 to $30 trillion economy compared to the 1.8 trillion in Mexico. The middle class of the U.S. is, as high as 280 million people, no? Which is massive. 180 million households in the U.S. It's a country that has a stable currency, low inflation, low interest rates, and loves to spend, loves to buy, and it's also spearheads many trends when it comes to brand development, to retail development, to distribution and logistics, etc. So the first thing I would say is to actually openly recognize that the U.S. should not be taken as a add-on to whatever commercial strategy Mexican brands have in Mexico. It should be a core part of the commercial strategy of any brand, and in doing so, of course, doing multiple things. No, one is staffing the opportunity well, understanding well the complexities and the how-tos in terms of implementing distribution, branding, marketing, and operations in north of the border. And as part of that, being focused on executing that plan for the long term.
And how is the U.S. market different to the Mexican market from the point of view of marketing and positioning a brand? What kind of advice would you give in the U.S. that you wouldn't give in Mexico?
Well, the U.S. It's so big that many brands split it in pieces. It can be understood as one enormous market, or it can be split in, let's say, 10 to 15 different metropolitan hubs or regional hubs. So brands can actually implement a strategy that could be fruitful in the short term, and then in the mid to long term go national. From a marketing perspective, of course, you have the same concepts, right? Branding is branding, and you have all the big techs controlling or having a big say on how branding is implemented. I'm talking about the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons of this world, alongside all the traditional types of media channels. So from a branding perspective, I think what's important here is that going national as a startup brand is almost impossible because of the size of the opportunity and the amount of money that needs to be invested. But from a regional perspective, many regions can behave similar to what Mexican agencies are used to be managing. So you can tap into the Texas market, or what you call let's say, the mountain market that is based most likely around the Denver region, or you can go Southern California or Northern California, or Florida or New York or Chicago. So you can choose the region you can tap first and then continue to other regions, while making these marketing and positioning efforts doable and manageable.
Juan, your proposition is quite intriguing because Mexico is already the largest exporter country to the U.S. But I guess what you are thinking more than anything is final consumer goods. Am I right to say so? And what are the products that you're thinking that you think should be better branded and marketed in the U.S.?
Almost in all categories, we have a very, very low market share. Yes, and this discussion has nothing to do with auto parts and the amount of oil and petrochemicals or infrastructure that we might sell to the U.S. In particular, because I wanted this article to be as useful as possible for consumer brands. There's so many different areas where we have literally less than 1% of market share in the US. So there are multiple brands Mexican brands that have tapped into the US market. Most of them focused on the Hispanic market, which is large, which is 65 to 70 million people. Companies such as Bimbo, Sigma, La Costeña, Samormex, of course, Jumex, that have been in the US for decades now. And some of them are tapping into the general market, but in general, they are focused on going after the Hispanic population akin to Mexican products. One of the reasons I also wrote this article is because I think Mexicans have to double click on the full potential of the total market, not only of the Hispanic market, which today is larger than the Mexican economy. Other local companies like Siete, which is a brand that was founded by Hispanics, that was recently acquired by PepsiCo. Somos, for instance, the brand that Daniel Lubeski, the founder of Kind Bars, recently launched. Ducal, Goya, and other brands are developing successfully in the U.S. market, but yet the potential is, of course, going for the whole market, which I believe that can be very fruitful in the coming years.
But in that sense, I mean, I guess everybody's trying to tap into the U.S. market because of the size and purchasing power of its middle class, like you said, 295 million people there. What are the barriers, or why are they doing it? What's your take on that?
Well, the U.S. it's large, and because it's large, is a lot more is sophisticated, and it's more capital intensive in some sorts as well. No, the amount of working capital you need if you want to go into a supermarket is much larger compared to Mexico. If you want to do a national campaign, of course, it requires a lot more resources. It might be right that there's more competition, but also the size of the price is much larger. I think the biggest barrier to entry is know-how and entrepreneur spirit and training about the U.S. market. I don't recall any school teaching how to get into the U.S. and understanding the U.S. market in any shape or form. No, at least I've never seen in a school that there is any course on understanding the U.S. market, the U.S. consumer, and the U.S. operations and distribution systems in order to develop products and services for the US. One economy that I have been recently very, very impressed, of course, around the US market is the drop shipping business, which Vietnam has just to use a country that can be compared to Mexico in a sense that it's more or less of a similar size, at least from a population point of view, not of GDP, because it might be close to 1/3 of Mexican GDP, Vietnam, but it has with 110 million people, it's similar size in terms of population. A country that has quadrupled its GDP in recent years, and that has moved very aggressively in what is called drop shipping, which pretty much is drop shipping for those that are not exposed to this term, refers to a person that does not live in a country that is selling a product that is in another country to a client that is on a third country. So it is a Vietnamese person selling a Chinese chair to someone living in Oregon. So this has become a massive market. And of course, this also happens with Mexico as a final client. So people are doing a lot of drop shipping into Mexico. So understanding the market, that doesn't mean that you need to be in the country, but understand the consumer better. I mean, I've worked for many years in the advertising bureau, in the interactive advertising bureau in Mexico, and I've been involved in doing research about the marketing industry, and approximately 20 to 30% of all ad spent in a country is associated with cross-border, which means that people are selling stuff that are not in your own country. So the potential is not only about going into US and selling juices and salsas to Hispanics, but also you can do so from abroad and sell other type of products.
And so you mentioned entrepreneurial spirit. Do you think that's one key factor that Mexico's companies or business are not as a risk takers as they should be to penetrate the U.S. market, that you need that aggressiveness, that persistence, that know-how, as you call it?
I would love to say that. I mean, I think we are great entrepreneurs, but I think the thirst to grow 3x or 4x or 10x is something that we lack. In Mexico. The barriers to entry in consumer product goods have collapsed, and many retail chains are moving aggressively into either private label or letting new entrants into the markets. So consumer packaged goods are having kind of a crisis, especially with non-living brands, so mid-tier brands and what it's called long tail brands, which is not your, let's say, not part of your top 3 or 4 brands that you sell the most. That's going to be a big challenge. So even though we do have an entrepreneur spirit within our veins, I think aggressiveness to grow and is something that we still lack, and it can be a combination of lack of capital or being comfortable with the profits that we have today, or having the fear of going into a market that we will not be competing in the same way we're competing in our own market. What it is true is that someone else is doing it, and we're not. I mean, especially Southeast Asian countries are the ones that are profiting the most from growing in the U.S. And I believe that that opportunity is something that Mexicans should move a lot more aggressively into.
And Juan, do you think that AI reduces the entry barriers to penetrating the U.S. market by making kind of consumer analytic data available to everyone at a low cost, and it's gonna facilitate this?
Well, I think the use of AI in marketing and storytelling is very real, and AI is collapsing the marginal cost of managing a brand, and that is a massive threat for companies that have large teams managing brands using old-fashioned ways of producing content and optimizing creativity, etc. So I think today, of course, we all have around the world access to the best tools out there, or the best tools of the week out there in how to manage and develop a brand. So it is a fantastic benefit, but also a curse if we don't use it. I would say that not using all the tools available is negligence that would actually lead brands to disappearing in the midterm.
And I think, Juan, you're developing your own avocado-based protein drink. Correct me if I'm wrong. How are you going about penetrating the US market? Maybe we can learn something from what you're actually doing. How are you using AI? Why do you think you'll be successful?
Well, I will probably be launching a product. I would guesstimate early February. I would love to come back to you and show you the progress on that field. And one of the important theses behind the product is using technology at the limit while taking this to the market, and that involves, not only from market research and getting to know the market better, but also creating synthetic personas, synthetic market panels to evaluate campaigns and strategies to take it to market, and using the best selling and distribution channels and pricing models. So I'm having quite a lot of fun around it. But also the thesis around this product launch has to do with using the best talent around the world to develop specific skills and to develop the specific capacities or capabilities of the product to succeed. So it's a fun project, and stay tuned for its development.
And talking about barriers to entry, when we talk to foreigners coming into Mexico, or some people generally advise them to have a local partner to understand the market. What you're talking about is, it's not necessarily that you need a U.S. partner to penetrate the U.S. market, or do you think that would be an easier way to do it?
It's a good question. Depending on the product, you need a partner, or you need, or a skilled service level, value added service provider. To launch a brand in the US, you don't need anyone. You just need to have a good product. You have to fix the logistics and making sure that the end consumer will receive the product. If you're launching a product with Amazon can do everything from setting up the store, payments, logistics, delivery, customer service, returns, everything, right? If you're going to retail, there's multiple brokerage firms and distribution companies that can actually help you in the strategy on how to go to the market. Understanding the market locally, and if you're going to the general market, I think as long as you have the ways to understand, to build empathy with the general market, you're going to be well off. But yes, if you're going to a general market, I strongly believe that I'm partnering with someone that understands better the psyche of the general market, as opposed to only understanding the Hispanic market is advisable. The word partner is relative, because partner it's either equity related or not. It could be established both ways, but I believe that the barriers to entry in the US are relatively low. It takes more. I think it takes a lot more will and interest than anything else.
Right. Interesting. Well, we will have to see how your own product evolves. If you come back and tell us about it, that will be fascinating. And also to follow up to see if your call to action for all the Mexican brands that exist actually makes a difference. When I'm sure people will listen and maybe phone you, contact you to give them some additional advice. For the time being, I think we've run out of time. Thank you for joining us, and we'll continue the conversation sometime later.
No, that's great, and thank you very much for the space. One closing comment I think is very important before I wrap up. It has to do with shareholder value creation, right? because many entrepreneurs are creating brands in Mexico. And the issue that many entrepreneurs have in Mexico, there's no liquidity. It's almost impossible to sell a brand in Mexico. If you ask around on how many brands have been sold in the past 4 or 5 years, you will probably not even be able to fill a hand. And that is because most CPG companies have more brands that they can manage. The US, that has 14,000 M&A transactions a year, probably has, at least 500 related to CPG brands. So developing the US is, I would say, is the only way to get liquidity if you build a brand. Unless you're lucky and you sell it to someone in Mexico, the US is probably the number one choice when it comes to having a chance to sell your business.
Fantastic. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Damian.
So that's it for this week's episode of Max Moves. Thanks for listening. We hope you come back, review us, share us, or whatever you want. We'll be here next week. Thanks again.